Illari is actually the weakest support of all time. Okay, that's definitely bait. Illari is actually very strong, but she might not be as busted as people are saying. Some people think that she's the most broken character of all time, while others think she's heavily overrated and actually quite bad. So what's the real truth? Let's break it all down in this video. But less than 25% of you are subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Press that subscribe button right now and let's jump into it. Now, when Illari first came out, the character looked insane. A lot of people were popping off with her very, very hard, and people overall just assumed this character was really busted. And in addition to this, the developers came out and said that they were going to intentionally release a character that might be overtuned and really strong, so the character doesn't end up in a wife leaver situation where they're just a little bit subpar and have to be buffed multiple times to see play. Now, in addition to that, Illari is actually already getting nerfed before she's going live into competitive, as confirmed by the devs of Blizzard, stating that they will nerf not only her ultimate, but the heal on her auto turret and maybe some other stuff. Now, before we even talk about whether or not Illari deserves the nerf, is too strong, is actually weak, let's talk about the reactionary response of a hero being dropped. And this happens pretty much no matter what the hero is. If the hero has the means to dominate in the hands of someone high skill, the character looks insane. And the reason the character looks insane is everyone gets the character and then they go hop in quick play and they just roll people that are way worse than their rank. Like, imagine any character that is a high skill character. Tracer, Genji, and they were just like introduced right now, right? These characters would just look insane if you slapped a freaking top 500 player and you just threw them in a low ranked lobby. They would all look insane. And I think this is important to understand, especially if we talk about a character that obviously has high mechanical skill requirements. Keep a grain of salt about how good the character looks when like early clips come out. This is super important. And one of the reasons why everyone realized that Lifeweaver wasn't actually that strong so early on is because even in the hands of really great players, they weren't able to farm the enemies. They weren't even necessarily able to farm bad players in the same way that you could do with a number of different characters if they were released into the game. Now, I also do want to make it clear that this doesn't mean that Illari is bad or unbalanced or broken or anything. This is just talking about how high skill characters are perceived by the community when they're dropped into the game for the first time. Now we're going to evaluate how strong Illari is and then decide whether or not she needed a nerf in the first place. Maybe she shouldn't be getting one and Blizzard is overstepping here. So what's the truth? Well, to evaluate Illari, let's compare her to some of the characters that she's fairly similar to. And I do think that the two that she's most similar to is both Ana and Baptiste. Specifically Ana because of her long distance effective range and a weapon that does do burst damage, although her burst damage is a bit higher than Ana, especially because it can critical and Ana's cannot. And while Illari has mobility where Ana does not, and an auto turret that can help sustain the team, Ana gets a very powerful suite of abilities in both nade and sleep, which I would argue has a much higher ceiling of impact than the Illari suite of abilities. But you also got to understand that because Illari has really high burst damage, if you can utilize that burst damage to high effect and utilize Illari's mobility to burst damage more or get in positions that you can burst people down and get picks and get meaningful damage, not just damage that is trash damage that gets healed up, then the mobility can like increase the effectiveness of her primary fire to something that is quite a bit more powerful than Ana's weapon, because Ana can't take an aggressive off angle and challenge people with burst damage. Her burst damage is less. She can't get away from an off angle because she doesn't have any mobility. So Illari is going to play very different than that. But nade and sleep are just so powerful that I don't really think that what Illari can do can compare. But let's move on to Baptiste, which is the character that is much more similar to Illari in the fact that he has really high close range burst healing. He has a sustain ability that just helps his team overall. You could think of his shift as something similar to the turret, although the turret is probably a little better, although it is going to get nerfed very soon. And then he does have long distance damage, although it is important, even though that his damage can headshot, Illari having a higher single target burst damage in an individual amount is going to be more impactful on average. Burst damage is always going to be better, just like how burst healing is going to be better. And while you could hypothetically hit all of the bursts in someone's head perfectly, I mean, it would just be effectively very difficult to do and not really realistic comparatively to Illari's And if we're talking about damage dealing, Illari is just going to be a better damage dealer most of the time than Baptiste. It's going to vary depending on skill, but I do think that going from like the middle rank up to the highest rank and the peak, Illari, that burst damage that Illari provides is going to be better than Baptiste. But if we match up abilities here, Shift and Turrets and his alternate fire, Baptiste's alternate fire heal that heals a lot in a very short period of time, and Illari's beam that has a close effective range as well and heals people up very, very quickly, then Baptiste is, yes, left at the end of the line with a slightly weaker primary fire, but he has a whole other ability that he gets to use, which is his immortality, because remember, both Baptiste and Illari both have movement abilities, where I do think that Illari's is probably a bit stronger. It's a bit more flexible. It has CC and can be used to make plays and take off angles and things like that. But taking the high ground is also really, really good depending on the map you're on, and Baptiste's Exit Boost gets to do it for free over and over again. And then the last thing that we have to compare between the characters is the ultimates, and I do think that while Amplification Matrix can be good, it's a little bit situational in the fact that you really want your team to get extra value with it, and it's not as proactive as like Illari's ultimate. I think overall, I would say that it's a weaker level of an ultimate, like a weaker tier of an ultimate than Illari's ultimate, but that might not stay the same because we know Illari's ultimate's getting hit, and they also are very, very different, so it's hard to compare them. Now, even with the comparisons to both Ana and Baptiste, the thing about Illari is that she just acts differently than these characters and can do things differently than these characters. The biggest one and the biggest reason that I think Illari is actually fairly strong, although not broken, is because you can take aggressive angles with a hit scan DPS, and you can sustain both of y'all and do a lot of burst damage from like an off angle. So as an example, it doesn't even have to be a hit scan. It could be like Hanzo or Ashe or Sojourn or whatever. Let's just say you take an aggressive off angle where your DPS wants to stay, you throw down your heal turret, and both you and the DPS get to constantly do burst damage from an angle that the enemies are going to have a really hard time dealing with. Not only does Illari have the capability to heal up the other DPS, but the turret is going to heal you both up, so you can't just get cleared off this corner very easily, similar to like a cracked out Soldier 76 heal station. And then even if things go wrong, you always have your mobility to get the hell out of there. So other characters like Bap don't have that horizontal mobility. Ana has no mobility. The only other character you could kind of compare this to is maybe Kiriko, but I do think that Illari has more consistent long range damage, even though Kiriko has like a whole suite of other abilities that are super, super strong. And yeah, I mean, I've already talked about how Kiriko is just in like a completely separate tier than all these other characters, so we're not really making any direct comparisons here. So when looking at Illari, the thing about her is that for ranked play, she's most likely going to be very, very strong in the right hands. Because just taking it off angle and applying pressure and potentially getting picks and doing all this stuff with another DPS or even by yourself is going to be worth a ton of value. It's going to be worth a ton because utility matters a lot less in these environments, especially when in ranked. Utility is not used very well consistently, and I do understand that her weapon is not the easiest thing to hit, but overall, just having a character that has high damage, the ability to make plays, the ability to help your DPS control these off angles, all these things are very, very strong for ranked play. However, and this is super important to understand, as players get better and better at utilizing the strengths of the other supports, whether that is proactive nades, whether that means teleporting as Kiriko with these off angles, controlling them, utilizing the full aspects of Kiriko's kit, which is not only applying a ton of pressure via damage and off angles, but bailing people out, peeling, being proactive, teleporting in. There's just a lot you could do. So all these characters have other means to get value. And while looking at these characters directly, oftentimes I think that these other characters actually stack up above Illari just with a flat-out kit. But because of Illari's power, burst damage in the primary weapon, and the mobility, and the sustain, this character is often going to play in ranked like a DPS that also has sustain. Like a really, really strong DPS. And I do think that triple DPS compositions, which is what it's going to feel like, honestly, is just good. Like, they're strong. And in ranked, I think it would probably be better most of the time than having two supports where neither of them are actually adding as much pressure, damage, and they're really not using their utility very well to win team fights. Like, I honestly think both Kiriko and Ana are tiers above Illari, assuming proper play and perfect play. But outside of that, in the chaotic nature of ranked, I think Illari gets better and better. Now, that being said, I don't really think that it makes sense to pre-nerf her before she walks into comp. Like, yes, the character is probably going to be strong and ranked in the right hands, but she still requires a lot of mechanical skill to get value with at all. So just auto nerfing this character, making her weaker right now before they've even gotten data of games in actual comp, to me doesn't make sense. Because yes, just like we talked about how the character looks better when played up against players that are worse than you, why would you only look at the quick play games and then decide, hey, this is enough information for us to decide to nerf the character? And I do understand that perhaps there were some aspects of the kit that were a little bit overtuned, but they could have just thrown her into ranked at least for a little bit and just seen and got more data that way. Now, coming full circle here, is Illari broken? No, she's not broken. She's actually underpowered in utility compared to several other supports already existing in the roster. But does that mean she's trash, unplayable, and the worst support? Also, no. Burst damage is a big deal. Mobility is a big deal. Burst heals is a big deal. Like, all these things are big deals. And just to prove my point here, look at Moira, who has no utility, has only damage, mobility, and healing. And Moira is something that is consistently played, consistently dominant at low ranks, and something that is even played up to high ranks, even seeing some play in pro play. So that just proves that utility, or powerful utility, isn't the only thing that matters, especially when we talk about ranked, where a lot of that utility is being misused anyways. So I know this is going to be a kind of a lukewarm take, but I do think that Illari is still just a very, very strong solo carry character. Gonna be very powerful. Would have been stronger pre-nerf, most likely, and we're gonna have to wait and see just how big these nerfs are, how much they're gonna affect the character. But I don't think that this character is weak. I don't really think this character is busted. Turns out this character might just be okay, and that's okay. I really do think that that's okay. But maybe I missed something. Maybe I got it wrong. So let me know down below. Do you agree or disagree with my take? Do you think Illari is broken or completely unplayable or somewhere in between? I really want to know your opinion about all that in the comments down below. And do me a solid and support the channel by pressing that subscribe button. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.